Tell me when we can go.
You're good.
All right, we're gonna get Ingrid up.
Thank you.
Is it showing? It's maybe non-video for this.
You're gonna have to wait a minute.
Okay. Should I start? All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Dorman and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. As I was saying earlier, there's so many things going on this evening. So it means a lot that you came here to gather with us for this event on a warm, hot July evening. We are in person here in the community room in the Princeton Public Library, as well as live streaming to our YouTube channel. I also wanted to thank the Princeton Adult School for co-presenting this event with us this evening. The program will run for about an hour, and we hope to have an opportunity for questions from the in-person audience at the end. As we are turning off or silencing our cell phones or other electronic devices, I thought it would be fun to share something my colleague Dana Treichler did. She loves and admires Steve Kornacki as much as I love and admire Ingrid Reed. And she asked AI to write a song about him, which brought her great joy, and she printed it out for all of us, and so I can share it with you. Okay. In khaki pants he stands, with polling maps and numbers in his hands, a master of statistics, sharp and wise. Steve Kornacki sees the truth behind the lies. This is the chorus. Oh, Steve Kornacki, analyst supreme, navigating data like a flowing stream. From precincts to counties, he'll break it down. In the world of politics, he wears the crown. On election night, he's in his zone, color-coded maps, his second home. From swing states to margins, he'll decode the clues in khaki pants and excellent shoes. This is the bridge. Through the chaos and the noise, he finds the signal, he finds the voice, a beacon of insight, steady and strong in the world of politics where he belongs. The chorus again, oh, Steve Kornacki, analyst supreme, navigating data like a flowing stream. From precincts to counties, he'll break it down. In the world of politics, he wears the crown. With khakis and polling data, this is the outro. He'll never lose to Steve Kornacki, our analyst bright. In numbers we trust, in him the light. Instrumental fade out. Are we able to have it?
Yeah, you're gonna do your intro.
No, that's just basically I'm introducing Ingrid.
Okay. Thank you.
Ah, there's Ingrid. Wonderful. Ingrid, it's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. I just want to make sure we can hear your voice.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
It is so much fun to welcome fourth, in case you forgot, annual visit of Steve Kornacki to Princeton to give us his thoughts on the next election. You may have already recognized that there is a different cast of characters talking with you tonight. Steve is back again, and as we have done before, we are having a guest who has Steve worked with and knows New Jersey. In this case, it's John Mooney of New Jersey, Princeton, New Jersey PBS. The other person on stage knows about Steve and John because she is my daughter, Liza, and Reed O'Reilly. I knew she would want to ask a question from the audience. So I'm giving her the opportunity to do so from the audience. So she has the opportunity to have one of her questions, giving her the opportunity to get in her question. Okay. Now, can we have Liza step up?
There we go.
And since she's my mom, I'm gonna ask both of you, if you could explain your connection to Ingrid, because you both have long-term histories with her. Steve, you wanna share the story, how you got to know her?
I came down to New Jersey from Massachusetts 22 years ago. At the end of the summer of 2002, I had not long before graduated college and kind of cast about trying to find a job, and got lucky enough to get a job with a website that covered politics only in New Jersey. And I literally came here. I mean, you know how little I knew about New Jersey. I was driving down and I thought the Tappan Zee Bridge brought you into New Jersey. Yes, I had a lot to learn. And it was one of the very first people I met, first talking to over the phone, and then I told people the story. How I met Ingrid Reed was about a week into being in New Jersey. There was a US Senate race going on. You remember this one? Bob Torselli was running for re-election, ended up not going well. There was a debate. He was still in the race. There was a debate between Torselli and the Republican Doug Forrester, and it was on News 12 New Jersey. And that's in Edison, and Raritan Center, if you know that one. And I walked in, big conference room at News 12 just to cover it. And a woman was sitting there. She introduced herself. It was Ingrid Reed. I had talked to her over the phone once. And I said, well, why are you here? It's on TV. She said she lives in Princeton. Princeton has Comcast. Comcast doesn't have News 12, but she thought it was important to see the debate. So she drove all the way to News 12 to make sure she saw it in person. That was my introduction to Ingrid Reed. And I think that summed up sort of her dedication to what she did, to always, understanding, learning, being on top of things, and it left a mark on me right away.
Yeah.
Awesome.
John, I think you have a long history.
Yeah, we do. I'm so glad to be here at the annual meeting of the Ingrid Reed Fan Club. And a charter member. We met, I was a co-founder of NJ Spotlight, which is for those who don't know it, a public policy news site. It's been around for about 15 years. It came out of the decimation of local news and newspapers. I was at the Star Ledger when they literally bought out half the newsroom, and it was a bigger risk to stay than to leave. So I got out and came up with others with this cockamamie idea of doing a digital news site covering public policy in the state. And Ingrid was one of the very first that we met in trying to pitch this idea. And in classic Ingrid fashion, she goes, maybe. And helped us steer it and get to funders who could support it in the beginning, which we did for a couple of years in getting it going. And then in 2010, oh, thank you. In 2010, we launched, and Ingrid was on our board and eventually became the chair of our board and led us through some wonderful years of being a startup, which for any of those who are out there know that they're completely non-stressful occasions where where the leadership of somebody like Ingrid Reed really made a huge difference in us feelings that we had something going. And 5 years ago now, we were acquired by WNET in New York and NJPBS, and we're now part of the public media family. And Ingrid helped us shepherd through that as well, that transition. And we're still here and in digital news, and as a startup to be still here 15 years ago is something. And I give all the credit in the world to Ingrid and other board members who really supported us through not always easy times. And she was indomitable, and I'd like to think we are too.
Yeah.
In that
Great.
spirit.
Excellent. Okay, now we're gonna get to the meat of it. So there's a lot going on in our country right now and in New Jersey. So Steve, you want to share some thoughts of current political situation?
Not sure what you're talking about. It was interesting to try to formulate and share some thoughts about it, because I think it's unfolding as we sit here. I don't need to tell anybody. But I don't know if you've seen just before this started, Biden had given a separate introduction at a press conference for Zelensky, This is an hour ago, and he called him Putin. It's literally I think the most critical hour of Biden's, political career, really, and the spotlight on him like never before. Obviously, that's that there's a lot happening in terms of Democrats just in the last 2 hours, and I suspect it's continuing right now, putting their names on statements that he should leave the race, and there's a lot leaking in the press right now. So sitting here now, it feels like things are in motion that are leading to sort of an inevitability here. But ultimately, it is, Biden's decision. We saw in 2016, Donald Trump, a month before the election, after the Access Hollywood tape, have the leaders of his party tell him publicly to get out of the race, and he refused. So Biden could still do that, but if he does, he would be withstanding what I think is already and is going to continue to be immense public pressure, with Democrats, I think, saying things about him that, were he to stay in the race, would be very damaging to his campaign. They're saying things now that get to his basic ability to govern. So it's unfolding as we speak, and I think this race may look very different 72 hours from now.
Wow. And Steve, you wrote something, you posted on Twitter about the history of somebody, changing in the middle of an election, and there isn't much of it, but you referenced somebody just a few minutes ago. There was a New Jersey connection that there is a.
Charlie's
story
he knows this one.
Well,
It was no major party presidential nominee has ever withdrawn from the race. And Biden's not officially the nominee, but we use the term presumptive nominee. He has the delegates locked up to control the ballot. Nobody in that position has ever dropped out presidential race. There's no precedent at the presidential level. So I said, well, what about major statewide offices, competitive races for major statewide offices, senator, governor, basically? And it's very, very few cases of a nominee in general election dropping out. But one of the very few was 2002 New Jersey, Bob Torricelli. And it's an interesting comparison. It's not an exact parallel. There are some pretty significant, I think, key differences between the situation. But if you remember it, New Jersey, look, a blue state at that point, it had been 30 years since New Jersey has sent a Republican to the Senate. And Torricelli has the ethical cloud hanging over him for the entire campaign. He barely avoids a federal indictment. And then at the end of September that year, this memo from federal prosecutors gets released by court order, and it basically says the allegations against them were credible. They couldn't bring a case because the guy, David Chang, the donor, was based on himself, was not credible. And a poll instantly had Torricelli down 13 points, and the Democrats had a 1-seat Senate majority. So the Democrats in Washington panicked because this they thought was going to cost them that majority. So they swung into action, told the New Jersey Democrats to get him out. New Jersey Democrats were scared, down ballot, it's going to have an effect, and they got him out. So 5 weeks before the election, Torricelli drops out. And if you remember, it was after the statutory deadline to change candidates on the ballot. So they had to go get a state Supreme Court ruling. They got it 7-0. And they got, and the Republicans, they cried foul. This was unfair, all this. They ran ads about it. They thought, they hoped there'd be a big public backlash. But the reality of that campaign ended up being that the voter anger was very, very Torricelli specific. And once Torricelli was gone, Democrats brought in Frank Lautenberg, ironically, Torricelli's arch enemy in politics. In that case, they took a candidate in his early 50s and replaced him with a candidate in his late 70s. That's where it's a little different right now. But Lautenberg ended up winning, by about 10 points. And it was, again, very few examples of it, but believe me, that's been on my mind the last couple of weeks.
And we have the twist this year where our senior senator himself is somewhat a little different. He's already withdrawn, effectively withdrawn as a Democratic candidate, but he has said and registered as an independent. In case, I know we're all following the national scene, but there was also a trial happening today that went to the jury. And I was checking my phone to see if any developments on that. It looks like it will formally go to the jury tomorrow. And then And it's, you know, to me, it's a toss-up, to be honest with you. You know, he's gotten off once, there's an opportunity that he might get off again. And what does that do to the race? I can't imagine, you know, I don't see any possible way that he is in the running to win the thing, but he certainly can affect the race in a lot of ways, and it feeds into right now a lot of cynicism, including in New Jersey, about the Democratic Party. And we saw it showed itself in the last governor's race, and it, you know, Andy Kim, the Democratic you know, congressman who is the Democratic candidate, I think is pretty safe, but we also thought that Phil Murphy a few years ago was pretty safe in running for re-election, and that ended up being very close. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens on this one. And I honestly, I mean, it seemed to be, you know, the gold bars sort of put it over the top for me. But, you know, he's now been able to somewhat explain that away, kind of. And so we'll see what the jury thinks. And remember, it only takes one juror not to go along with this. And he's done it once, and so, you know, Bob Menendez is a tough guy. He could do it again.
I'm interested to hear your assessment that he has a chance to get off on this too. Is it's just interesting to me because I kind of have been assuming the gold bars made this.
Well, he's mostly blaming his wife,
Right.
And, you know, as I said, it really only takes one person to go with the story. So, and how much that ultimately affects, I think Andy Kim is pretty safe, but as I said, it's a weird year in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So getting back on the national level, Steve, your polling's your thing. So what's new with your polling efforts with NBC? Do you have things coming out soon, or what have you been watching over the year?
Yeah, I mean, we periodically have, you know, I think we have about 5 that are gonna come out. Of course, the year we've already had 2. You know, our last one was about 2 months ago now, April, I think 3 months ago. But what I've been paying attention to the last, obviously since the debate, is what does the polling landscape look like since the debate? And as I was saying backstage, it's interesting to me because I've been trying to put my finger on this, and it's basically this. Well, I put it this way: our poll and every other poll I've been seeing for the last year now, I think, and the last summer is when it really kind of shifted, has had Biden in a very perilous situation, and has had Trump doing better than he ever did in 2020 in a poll, ever did in 2016 in a poll. So that's been kind of the world I've been living in polling wise for, you know, nearly a year now. And so my reaction to the polling that's come out since the debate is a little bit of surprise to me that it hasn't moved that much. I'd say on average, the net has moved about 2 points, you know, in Trump's direction. But we're not talking about 10 points, 50. What I just described with Torricelli, where suddenly he's down double digits. We're not seeing that. So I've been looking at that and thinking more about, like, Trump has such high negatives, you know, really just kind of established now over a decade. That seems to be preventing Biden from having from a huge drop in the polls. And I'm wondering about the implications of that. But what I'm noticing is, you know, a lot of the conversation, whatever you call it, has been focusing more on how bad Biden's poll situation is, which I've been trying to reconcile, because again, I look at it and I'm like, well, it hasn't really changed that much. But I think what's happened is, just as there was this sort of delayed recognition that you're now hearing about Biden's ability to, you know, serve as president, be a candidate, you know, everything you saw in the debate, I think what's coming hand in hand with that is, I get the sense there were a lot of people who were either looking away from or dismissing the polling for the last year, and weren't maybe living in the same kind of space I was, where, you know, Trump was doing quite well in the polls, and they're now seeing that, and they're now responding to that. So I kind of feel like when I look at it and say, boy, it hasn't changed that much, they're looking at it and saying, whoa, Trump's ahead. And it just, to me, Trump's been ahead for a while. So I'm not seeing a change. But I think if the idea of Trump being ahead is something that a lot of Democrats are just looking at and coming to terms with, that I think that might explain some of the kind of reactions you're seeing now.
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
I'm also a member of the Steve Kornacki fan club. So I'm gonna throw a couple out, but comparing the national polling with swing state polling and individual, I mean, we're so fixated on the national numbers. How do you, as a journalist who studies these, how do you reconcile them? Do they follow hand in hand to a degree? Talk a little bit about the ones that you emphasize, because obviously, as we've learned, we don't run on popular vote in this country.
Right.
Or at least the final tally. Talk a little bit about swing states as well.
Yeah, well, and the problem there too is we just don't have that many polls of the swing states.
Yeah.
And certainly since if the debate is a cutoff line, we really, we have some. There was a set that came out over the weekend, I think from Bloomberg. And they, I can't remember which state, Biden was up in one state, one of the swing states. I think they had penciled, it was a little bit weird. They're always gonna be weird because there's just noise in polls. I think they had, Trump up 7 in Pennsylvania. I think they had Biden up, Michigan or Wisconsin. But again, you didn't look at the numbers and say, wow, this is a huge shift in the debate. And you just don't have many other, good quality swing state polls to look at since the debate. So you're kind of, again, flying a bit blind on these. The reality of the swing states, though, is if and when we do have more reliable polling, I mean, even the Biden campaign will say this, they look at the swing states, they look at the electoral math as those 3 Great Lakes states that Biden flipped in 20, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they look at that as their best chance and maybe their only chance. That it's if they hold those 3 and Trump flips Georgia and Arizona and Nevada, and the polling for Trump that we have seen all year has been encouraging in those 3 states for him. That only gets him to 268. So if Biden protects those 3 Great Lakes, right? And there's a real technical thing here but it's very important, where Nebraska gives them out by congressional districts.
Right.
And there's a congressional district there that Biden won that very limited polling, but there's been a little bit that suggests Trump could get that. And so 268 for him with those 3, if he adds that congressional district, takes him to 269. But the Biden people and the Trump people think this way too, kind of in reverse. It's, can Trump get one of those Great Lakes states? If he can, there's really no scenario for Biden. But if Biden protects them all by that much, he could win it.
My other question, are you polling on alternative names?
So yeah, there've been 4 now, I think 4 polls that have come out, all conducted post-debate that have measured. You see a few, and they're of quality that I wouldn't necessarily vouch for, that test a whole bunch of names, but there've been some good quality polls that test Harris and test Biden. So there's one this morning that has Harris running 3 points net better than Biden. There's a CNN one that had Harris running 4 points net better than Biden. There's a Yahoo one, YouGov, it's decent pollster though. It had Biden running 3 points net better than Harris. Should know that it's not. Again, I look at these poll numbers and the poll numbers themselves are not screaming to me, the floor is falling out for Biden and Democrats are clearly better in some other direction.
So, Steve, you've been working on polling for a long time, and your red and blue book was all about in the 80s and the 90s. You want to talk a little bit about how polling has evolved over the years, and it's kind of different now than it was back in the 90s, and
People don't like to answer the phone.
yeah.
It's, the number of calls it takes them to get we have, generally we'll have about 1,000 people in our poll, gets you a pretty decent, margin of error under control. But the number of calls required to get that 1,000, it gets higher and higher. It's people getting rid of landlines. It's people just who answers anymore. Cell phones will be used, but even that you learn, you don't recognize the number. It's not even listed as probable spam. So the barriers to getting enough people on the phone are much, much higher now. I think there's a cost that goes along with that. However, and there have been some really, really major polling misses. I think you're all aware of them. But the one takeaway I have over the last few years of polling is I don't think the issues I'm describing, I don't think have made it really bad. I think the polls have still held up pretty well under, in the 2022 midterms, our final poll, NBC. We did, Democrats or Republicans, who do you want to vote for, for Congress? And, I think we had the Democrats ahead, I think by a point. And as you recall, probably the, Democrats did not retain the House, but they did much better in the midterms in 2022 than a lot of folks expected, but it was in line with our poll. To me, where the big polling misses have occurred, are in 2016 and 2020 when Donald Trump's name was on the ballot. And there've been a lot of theories about what that effect is all about. There've been some attempts that were made by pollsters between 16 and 20. They thought to correct for it. It did not correct for it. It happened again in 2020. But I believe more than any technical thing there is, and we'll see if it holds this year, there's a Trump specific effect that caused those misses in 16 and 20.
Do you think that might happen at all with Biden?
Well, yeah, so
honest about where they stand on him?
the issue with the effect with Trump, I think, is people who just wouldn't answer. And I think they may have had it. It might be an issue specifically with its media, its polls. They don't trust, they don't have social trust kind of thing. And it's a certain type. See, it used to be in polling, when you try to get a representative sample, you look at the demographics and, okay, this state is X percent white. What percent of our, pool is white? Do they match? Do you have to wait for that? So what happened in 16 was you have the right number based on demographics of white voters in the poll, but it turns out there's this huge gap among white voters where white voters with college degrees, increasingly Democratic, white voters without college degrees, increasingly Republican, like 40-point net difference between them. And so in 16, they had way too many whites with college degrees in these states. And the big reason why Hillary had these leads that evaporated. But the big change they made between 16 and 20 was they started to ask about and wait for and bring that college degree status into it. It still missed. So it became clear that it was not reaching. And it's very deep. I think they reached the right number of white voters without college degrees. But of course, Trump may be winning that group by 40 points. But if the Biden voting white voters without college degrees are the ones more likely to answer the poll, you're still going to get distorted polls. I think that happened. There's only one poll so far this year that I'm aware of. It was the most recent New York Times one, where Nate Cohn, who does the polling for them, said there was a response issue where the Republicans were more likely to respond, pick up the phone for the poll than Democrats, which would hint to the possibility of the similar thing happening in reverse. But that's the only poll I'm aware of where that's been an issue yet. So it certainly could happen, but there's only one poll right now to kind of go in that direction.
So the presidential ticket, who knows what's going to happen with that? Are there any Senate races that are key across the country that are going to drive voters or getting a lot of attention from your team?
Yeah, but New Jersey, as much as we can. I always
want
want
that. So
yeah.
well, but we can go back to
I jumped ahead a little bit.
No,
we'll
that's
actually talk
yeah.
of the key of what's going on if Menendez runs.
Even if he's convicted, I think he might even run from,
Precedent.
as he waits for his sentence or something. He's so defiant on this thing. But it's Andy Kim, a remarkable story, as many of you know, on how he, got into Congress in the first place in New Jersey, in a tough district for him. And really, brought a lot of respect to it, or to himself, and sort of jumped ahead of the crowd when Menendez was not part of the picture anymore. And as we all know, Tammy Murphy was immediately part of the picture. And there was a foregone conclusion that she was going to get nominated, and she was going to go on and be the next senator. And Andy Kim took it on, literally and figuratively, in terms of challenging the system, New Jersey system. And I'm curious your experience with it, covering it years ago. But Andy Kim, with the help of, and I don't know if Julie did make it here, and Sass Rubin, at her work at Blaustein at Rutgers, really put put a nail in the county, the county line, as they call it, the party line, the county line on the ballot. And really opened up the contest for other candidates. And he took it to court and found a judge, well, he didn't find it, but happened to have a judge who fully agreed and really wrote a searing indictment of the system of how we had done our ballots, just for the Democrats, because the way, the legal system works is it's who's the party to the lawsuit, and the Democrats were the only party in the lawsuit. So it really only happened where they did away with the county line for the Democratic primary. What's interesting to me is still the favored candidates of those party organizations still prevailed by and large. And I think it does speak to still the power. It's not just the ballot. There's certainly the power of having county organizations being able to get out the vote for individual candidates. But clearly the county line on the ballot was problematic, had been for years. People have been talking about it for years. And Andy Kim really came along and took it down. It'd be very interesting. I mean, I think I think he has enough integrity that I don't think it was a show, but I think even him cleaning up after January 6th in the rotunda was, played to his image as, that underdog who, isn't, doesn't feel he's stooping it or cleaning up the floor or anything like that. And he'll be an interesting candidate. And he certainly, if he wins, he'll be an interesting senator, coupled with Cory Booker. It's dynamic a pair as any state has in terms of candidates. So I think, he has led the way. Democrats, by and large, is really New Jersey reelects incumbents. Part of it is because of the county line issues and the strength of party politics. We're not even going to talk about a certain power broker in South Jersey who also happens to be in a courtroom. I had Bob Menendez and George Norcross both in a courtroom this week. But by and large, incumbents win. I think, I don't see that changing a whole lot. We have one race, Tom Kane Jr. Against Sue Altman, where it could be close. I think Cook, if I looked at it, leaned Republican, but somewhat of a toss-up. I can't remember their labels. But I'm guessing Tom Kane will likely prevail in that one. He has, one of our frustrations as journalists is he doesn't talk to the press anymore, literally. And we even now have a reporter in Washington who, who can walk up to him in the Capitol and ask him to speak. And he's somewhat, he doesn't spurn away, but he won't go on the record with anything. So I think he's built his little silo that I think he'll be able to carry, especially given what we were talking about earlier, where I just think the Democrats are going to have a rough year in a lot of ways in this state, but we'll see.
So one thing in the New Jersey primary, an Ingrid connection to this county line, and Julia Sass-Rubin, I have not had the pleasure of meeting you, but I've heard your name for the whole month of May leading up to the primary. There was in a room where it happened in Princeton, there was a group of people concerned about fair voting. My mother, Ingrid Reed, and Julia Sass-Rubin, and some others, and several years ago, and they saw this county line and they thought, what can we do about this? And fortunately, Julia volunteered to her experiences and resources at Rutgers, and she did the research that was then brought to the court case. And she is a big heroine of Ingrid's. So when you see Julia, thank her for all her work, because Ingrid loves her to death.
Well, I think it was exhibit A. It was exhibit A
Yeah,
in the lawsuit.
Yeah. But Steve, what other races are key across the country, that Senate or even congressional?
Yeah, and just to quickly, I've been hearing you describe the landscape right now. It is so striking to me. The line was such a tough concept for me to learn when I came down here, because it's very unique, as you probably know. But then when I just think back at some of the campaigns that I covered, it's about 20 years ago, the line was just definitive. You remember Dick Cody became the governor. Well, Jim McGreevey, first of all, became the governor by winning this behind the scenes battle with Bob Torricelli, there's that name again. They both wanted to be the Democratic gubernatorial nominee in 2001. They called this the 12 days of Torricelli. There's a term being passed, but it was nothing to do with voters. It all played out the summer before 2000, and it was who was going to get the power brokers for the big counties, for the lines. And there was a minute there when it looked like Torricelli was going to pull it off. And then McGreevey, I think it was Sharp James and in Essex County, he got to flip back to his column at the last second. And McGreevey survived. And then the primary is an afterthought. He had no competition, he just gets nominated and that's it. And Dick Cody became the governor when McGreevey resigned and wanted to run for a full term in 2005. But John Corzine, then the senator, wanted to be the governor too. And Corzine had something that Cody didn't have. Limitless cash. And so he got, these county organizations knew their campaigns with Corzine on the ticket were paid for. And they're worried about, the local races, the freeholders at the time, I don't think it's changed. But ultimately that was it. I remember covering that. And from a, reporting standpoint, it was all about who's getting the Mercer line, who's getting the South Jersey lines, who's getting the Middlesex line. And it became clear Cody was only going to have Essex, his home county, because it was his home county. He, made a play, I remember, for Bergen County. The boss there was Joe Ferriero. Didn't work. The whole thing, Cody did not run, even though he had a 70% approval rating, because he didn't have the county lines. And so it's a completely different world you're describing now. What you're describing is, obviously we all know it's kind of the world in every other state, but it's so new and so different.
Well, and and it's what happened with Phil Murphy as well,
Right.
Where he came in and Steve Sweeney, the Senate president, wanted to be governor. He had his own George Norcross supporting him, but Phil Murphy came in and basically, flashed the cash to county organizations and was able, pretty much in a week or two. I mean, it was amazing how quickly that all came down. And I think he thought that Phil and Tammy thought that could work again with her candidacy. Obviously, we know what happened there in terms of the court stepping in. But whether it really opens up the process or it just makes it like every other corrupt state, not corrupt, but every other state where party organizations carry a lot of weight. Yes, I think it will be that. Whether all of a sudden we're going to see some underdogs out there that are going to win races, to a degree, you will see. I think we will see more Andy Kims and maybe Sue Altmans, but it is still a system that, through a variety of factors, including redistricting and all those, things don't change very quickly in the state in terms of who wins these elections, and incumbents typically, still are going to fare as well as any.
I'm watching the clock, so we'll have some time for questions, but one thing, between now and November, it's a lot more time. And Steve has other assignments at NBC, so you want to share what he's been at Ascot in London doing some horse racing, and then what do you have coming up?
Oh, listen,
Next-
my bosses are gonna love the promotion.
Activities.
Thank you. No, we got the Olympics coming up,
Yeah.
and I've been very lucky the last few years to get to do some stuff with the sports side at NBC. And obviously that's NBC's signature event. So I will be going, I tell people, not to Paris, but to the Paris of Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut. And be doing some coverage from there, about a half dozen things throughout the games, but it's a very fun thing to be a part of. And I thought, when we originally planned this, that it was going to be a pretty slow time between the conventions in the middle of summer. That is not what it's looking like anymore.
Well, the convention, I mean, conventions all of a sudden, they've been, these fairly boring shows.
Yeah,
And who knows,
Something interesting might happen.
Yeah, so
maybe NBC will have must-see TV again.
I
for
know.
a change.
Yeah.
Anything exciting coming up in New Jersey?
well,
spotlight?
yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, we have 2 or 3 people in court. And, we have, we're gearing up for the governor's race next year, which will be really interesting. We can come back next year and talk about it, but being the first race in Virginia, being the first governor races after the presidential election, has always made them, a sort of a fascinating bellwether for the rest of the country. So we're starting to gear up on that. We just finished, this is a shameless promotion, but I'll use the opportunity. And it was something that Ingrid was influential in us developing it, is we just did a project called the Change Project, where we looked at issues in New Jersey that have seemed intractable. And we're all reporters who've covered that. I've covered education for 30, 40 years, it seems. And so we wanted to go with these challenges, but look at things that have worked in addressing them. And we've done it with some harm reduction in opioid, maternal health. The education one that our Hannah Gross did for us was around early literacy. And it's been an interesting experiment for us as journalists, because we usually are sort of staying, laying out all the facts and standing back. And here we're not advocating for these solutions, but we're trying to bring at least some attention to them. And the reaction has been really positive. And I think you're going to see more of it. One of the projects was, it's not the most exciting topic in the world, but around the transparency of our state budget, which is anything but transparent. And John Reitmeyer, our finance writer, really wrote about other states that do this significantly more transparently than New Jersey does. And lo and behold, and I'm going to give John full credit, but there may be some other players out there. They're starting to talk about actually making some changes in the process. Yeah. So that's very satisfying as a journalist. And so you'll see more of that coming around a variety of topics. It's a wild time to be a journalist. I mean, there's in New Jersey especially, first of all, there's a New Jersey angle to everything. So any national story or international story, for the matter, we can find a way to write about it. But there's so much rich subject matter to be writing about and to be doing broadcast around. So I've been in this business a long time, but having as much fun as I ever have as a journalist.
Great. So we can take a few questions from the audience. We go here. Right. Bro, we're gonna give you the microphones.
Yes, please wait for the microphone. I didn't make my hearing loop announcement at the beginning.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, you really actually getting to what I was gonna ask, but I really wanna ask Steve this question. I was particularly in grief when 20 first graders were murdered in Connecticut. 14 billion was spent on the last election in 2020. I think I'm right about that. Child poverty was reduced by nearly 50% with the child tax credit, and then it wasn't renewed. Climate change is really a concern for me. My question is, when you put the polling aside and the horse race aside, kind of what's in your heart on an issue or two that concerns you?
Well, I appreciate the question, but honestly, for the job that I do, and for the role that I'm trying to play here, it's not a question I want to address, because the truth is, if I believe that if I express an opinion on a policy issue or about a candidate, anything, it will immediately call into question the reliability of what I'm saying about where the election stands, where a race stands. And there will be suspicions that I cannot just tell people to wave away, that I am shading it to one side or the other. And I think, the role that I try to play depends on people having no idea what my view is, if I have one. And so I appreciate the question, but.
I just want to ask you about polling, because I actually used to do it. Back in 2010, I worked at a company called Broad Research, which is here in Princeton. It's located in that office complex that's across the street from the airport. And I think a lot of people don't actually know how polling works. Actually, I'm sure they probably updated their equipment by now, but back then, that was in 2010. Back then, they had these really old computers from the 80s that were in like really bad shape. it's kind of falling apart, and it's a room with like 50 people on computers, and they dial like every phone number that's like possible, that's mathematically possible. And it's just any random person that answers the phone, and I don't think that's gonna be sustainable in the future, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that. What they might change as far as the way polling is done.
Yeah, no, I mean, that gets right to, what we were talking about there, about people not answering the phones anymore, and it's just more and more of those calls being made. Just one of the changes that, I don't say changes, but one of the trends I think you're seeing with how polling is conducted is, some now are moving away from the idea of just, dialing random numbers and getting whoever comes on the phone and building polls off of what they call the voter file. And that's lists of, people, it's validated, by public record that they voted in the last election, or they voted in X number of elections over the last, decade or so. To build a sample that way. So that is a trend. Now, of course, that's meaning you're casting not as wide of a net. It probably makes it harder to get people on the phone. But yeah, it's the billion-dollar question in the polling industry is, like I said, I don't think it's reached a point right now where these things are just completely, useless. But what's the point where, you're just not getting enough people to have a meaningful product? I don't know what it is. I don't know what the solution is, and neither does the industry.
Can I ask a question of the audience? Raise your hand if you've ever been called for a political poll. Okay,
Wow.
that totally refutes my point. I don't know anybody now. I guess I do know some people.
It seems like the kind of crowd that would answer the phone.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't ask if we answered.
That is true.
Okay. Raise your hand if you answered the call from the polls.
Ah,
I take it back.
good statistician there.
Chris.
So this is a question about the media. So what upsets me more than anything about Trump is how many people will actually vote for him. And I think that the lack of, sort of standard media has really changed how people, what they understand to be the truth. And so I'm just curious, what both of you see up there as a way forward out of this. And I know this is near and dear to Ingrid's heart, which is why she was on the board of NJ Spotlight, but beyond sort of that optimism, what's the path?
It is a perilous path. I mean, it's, and I'm also really glad, speaking of I was gonna say something about AI, that nobody wrote a song or had AI wrote a song about AI. I mean, I think that there's certainly the standards of journalism have broken down a bit. It wasn't, the rose-colored glasses of looking at, those standards from, 20, 30, 50 years ago. My father was a New York Times journalist for a long time, and I think we all think that there was some golden age, but I also think that journalism skipped over a large part of their communities for a long time. And, both politically and demographically and geographically. And I think that what is encouraging to me is I think there is somewhat of an awakening where media is reaching out more, engaging more, not in his ivory tower. And so, I'm encouraged by that. And it's become, again, we're a small startup of 8 reporters. It's nothing compared to the NBCs and the like. But it's going to take, a step at a time. We're working a lot more. I mean, one of the interesting facts about New Jersey that, and I'm in the business, and I didn't know this, but there's something like 60 ethnic media news sites in this state. And ethnic being, representing a community. And we're starting to work with them as well, and hyper locals are starting to emerge out of it. So I'm encouraged that there are some seeds in the ground and there are things that are starting to grow, but there's also bad actors. And that's where it's troubling and challenging to try to overcome. I don't, Steve, I know if he says something and, if it comes off as an opinion, he'll get 100 emails and the like. We're a little safer from that. But we get certainly pushback in terms of some of our coverage sometimes and some of it seeming more organized than others. And it's, it's a very interesting time out there. Everybody's their own media now. You don't really need these players in the middle like us anymore. You can, Tom Kane has learned that he doesn't need to talk to us. He can get his message out just fine otherwise. So it's not even just the media, it's what purports to be media.
Well, I'm encouraged that you're encouraged, though.
Well, yeah.
Thank you. Steve, this is probably a little bit before your time, and in fact, maybe for the whole panel. But in 1968, Lyndon Johnson was virtually assured the nomination, but then chose not to pursue it. The party coalesced around Hubert Humphrey, and then he lost. And I'm wondering if there is anything in the data that suggests that a very similar scenario would not take place if, particularly if Kamala Harris got the nomination because Joe Biden stepped down. I'm thinking about not just the setup of the withdrawing from the race, but also the fact that the convention is going to be in Chicago, and there has been tremendous campus unrest all year, exactly as there was in 1968. Do you have any reason to see why it might be different from 1968?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, my take on 68 is a couple of things. First of all, LBJ getting out happened a lot earlier.
Yeah.
As you're talking about March, and to the extent there was a primary season back then, it still played out. Bobby Kennedy got in, and but yes, I mean Humphrey is the last nominee to not win a single primary or enter a single primary. He was picked, by the party leaders at the convention, and even if Kennedy had lived, I think that would have happened. But I think the situation was different too, in that LBJ was wounded politically in a way where, had he persevered, I suspect would have lost by a very significant margin to Nixon. Nobody will ever know. I suspect if Kennedy had lived, I don't know that Kennedy would have gotten the nomination if he lived, because the way the party was favoring Humphrey. But I think if Kennedy had somehow gotten the nomination, a real chance of beating Nixon. And Humphrey lost, but it was by a point. And it was by a very small margin in a couple of states. So to the extent there's a lesson, from 68, I'm not sure they tried, it didn't work. There's a read on that where they salvaged a lot more than they would have, with LBJ. But like I was saying earlier too, my bigger view of the kind of historical precedent angle is there just isn't one. There's never been a nominee replaced, and the political world has changed so much, and the particulars of this are so unusual, where the opponent for Biden is a former president, that the way age has become an issue in this campaign. I just don't. It's truly, it's a cliche to talk about how unprecedented these times are that we're living in, but I wouldn't go into it with any expectation of, this should work because history says this, or this shouldn't work because history says that. I think history is being written as we speak. Yeah.
Also, the notion of Democrats and coalescing in the same sentence. I don't see it.
It is 8:00, so thank you all for gathering for Ingrid's party. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Liza. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, John. Thank you all so much for coming, and have a good evening. Thank you.